we actually do need something toward which all religions or worldviews are evolving, right? It's like we do need a North Star. We do need, even to say something like, oh, Buddhism believing that it's an evolving Buddhism, or Christianity believing that's an evolving Christianity, that in and of itself, oh, there's a first principle and first value, evolution. So yeah, that's one of the North Stars that make up this worldview that is the context for our diversity, right? Is evolution. We're actually in Vermont. And right now I want to set our intention. So one of our intentions right now is actually to invite you into more the intimacy of this experience, this pioneering, leading edge experience, right? This event. But before I do that, I just want to speak to our yearning for just a moment. Feel into what is it that brought you here right now to listen to this, to participate in this broadcast? What is it about the depths of your humanness that invited you here? The yearning that perhaps you're in a place where, like me, you grew up within a religion that provided some context, some clarity, and a connection to the divine. But eventually you got to a point where you realized this story was too limited to hold the depth and the complexity of what it means to be human. Or maybe you're coming from a place where you were never given any sense of religion or ultimate truth, and yet you've always felt that intuition that there has to be something. And you've had experiences, you've glimpsed it, right? And it wasn't until the words that are articulated a lot by Marc that you finally found language to put meaning to your experience, to make sense of it. Or maybe you have children, right, that didn't grow up with a sense of meaning and purpose and coherence to the cosmos, and you're desperately yearning to transmit something to them, but you don't know how, right? Here we are in one mountain, all converging with these yearnings, which are participating in the depth of yearning, the divine yearning. So this is why we're in Vermont right now, and this is why we're broadcasting on One Mountain, Many Paths. We're in the Northeast Kingdom. I want to give you the picture of where we are. So as I describe it, try to just sort of imagine you're here with us, because you are. It's snowing outside. We're surrounded by woods, right? Forests in all directions. There's a little frozen pond in front of the monastery. We're in a monastery, a Zen monastery, based on principles of Buddhism, right? But it's a Buddhism that's engaged with the world, and a Buddhism that recognizes the existential risks that we're threatened by. So what do we call him? The leader of this community, Soryu, is a deeply masterful Zen Buddhist practitioner, right? He lived in Japan many years. He's been practicing his whole life. He's devoted his entire life to this enlightenment, which in one way to look at it, it's the enlightenment of emptiness, right? All beyond form. And then we have a rabbi who comes in, who's raised Orthodox rabbi in the deepest study of texts, which actually brought him to an enlightenment as well, an enlightenment of fullness that actually fully engages in the experience of what it means to be human in every detail, right? So you have these two masters, and then you have Zach Stein, who didn't grow up in either of those camps, but found his way into enlightenment through music, right? It's sort of a secular enlightenment of the music, which reverberates as the music of cosmos. So you have these three masters in their own lineages, let's say, coming together, longing to be together, because they know that only by coming together and synergizing with their perspectives can something new be born. So that's the context. And then, these 3 days of events. Friday we started, was it Saturday? Saturday, we started with the meta crisis, right? That's the context of all of it. Day 2, today, is all about technology, the artificial intelligence, exponential technology, and world religion, and why it's so important. And then day 3, tomorrow, we're going to come back around to the sense of lineage and what is a student and teacher relationship, and kind of maybe the practical next steps of that. And throughout this whole event, imagine there's probably about 15 to 20 people, mostly residents here at the monastery, that have devoted their lives every day to getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, meditating, chanting, studying, exercising, dialoguing, practicing together, praying, chanting, right? And so here with this group, we actually practice, Marc and Zach and Soryu present their ideas, and then we all receive them, and there's reading, there's discussion, we have breakouts throughout the day to discuss. We have a whole section of praying and chanting together, where we practice in both lineages, the Zen lineage and the Hebrew wisdom tradition. We do some meditation, even some intersubjective meditation, where we practice falling in love with each other. So this is a deeply multi-dimensional, multi-sensorial, let's say, experience of the synergy of coming together. So what is the context here? The context is this evolutionary impulse. Is evolution the entire cosmos that is bringing us together? And the meta-crisis is what we describe as this time in history, this point in history, where we have multiple crises that are actually threatening the very existence of life on Earth, right? Of human life, for sure. Right? Climate change being an obvious one, but you also have threats of nuclear war. You have supply chain, disruptions through, cyber warfare, pandemics, artificial intelligence, exponential technology improvements and advancements way beyond anyone's ability to manage, regulate, or rein them in, or kind of imprint them with values. You have an epidemic of depression, especially in the Western world, where people have lost ground of meaning. There's polarization. People get stuck in their worldview and aren't able to see the field that they're participating in. And so you have potential breakdown of democracy as we know it. So we look at, in the face of this meta-crisis, who are we? What do we do? If we go back to the religions, merely go back to the religions, we can see that they were created at different times. They don't fully actually aren't fully capable of responding to the challenges of this moment. And yet, postmodernity that has rejected religions also doesn't have a response to this moment, because in postmodernity, there's no ground of value to actually stand on and stand for the continuation of our species. Right? So we're sort of in this lost space and time. And here we are recognizing that we need to reweave the fabric of reality, recognize that there is value. There is that divine yearning which we all feel, which we all were invited by to come today, right? That divine yearning is real, right? Just a sidebar, I was just telling Kristina about I went to Landmark a few weeks ago, the Landmark Forum, and they spend the entire time sort of deconstructing the stories that are inhabiting my life, right? All the stories that are unconsciously filtering out reality until we get to a point of spaciousness, of a possibility of possibility. But at the end, they also say it's all meaningless and made up. So create your own life. Now, I have to say, in spite of, and maybe because of that, the next day I felt closer to God than I ever have been, seemingly, right? I actually felt such a depth of connection to something that felt so real, because it is real, right? And I have my interpretive lens, which I have my, I call that force, that connection, God, beloved, the mystery, right? But there is a sense in which I was clearing away that which was diluting my perception to feel the spaciousness of the possibility of possibility, which incidentally Marc defines as God. So that's just a little sidebar in saying that we actually we can find in the depths of our human experience that which is real. And so that's our intention here. We need to re-articulate and weave together a narrative that enables us to touch the real, to see the real, to feel the real, but not only have to go back to an ethnocentric, homophobic, xenophobic, limited lineage or lens. We actually can up-level the lineage and include them in a world spirituality, a world religion that's a context for our diversity. One thing that Marc said that I really love is that the meta-crisis reveals the consequences of living as if we are separate in a world that is interconnected. So in other words, the only reason we're experiencing these tragedies and these crises, the only reason that we look to friends and children and we see people falling apart around us is because the truth that we are one and interconnected and that we all are unique expressions of that oneness is being diluted and actually lost. So we're imagining that we're separate. And so we're actually living this horror story in a certain sense. So it's actually revealing the truth of our interconnectivity. So we're in one mountain, many paths, and we're standing for the one mountain, that there is the one, right? But there's many paths to that mountain, right? Postmodernity said there's just the paths and anyone can search their own path. Imagine that if you were trying to climb a mountain and it didn't matter which way you went, how lost you'd get and how scary that would be, right? Well, we're saying, no, there are many paths up this mountain, but there is a mountain, right? So here we are, standing for this one mountain, many paths, where this value of the one is uniquely disclosed in each and every one of us. So with that, setting the context and the intention, I'd like to pass my word to Shahati, who's going to share the code, the evolutionary love code, which actually is such a perfect code for this weekend. It actually sets kind of the concise framework and the context for what we're doing here. So Shahat, please, would you share the code and maybe read it twice for us?
Yes, I will, David. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you. And a little thing from prayer meeting this week, what Marc said was, underneath depression is despair. And at that point, when he said it, I could feel it so in myself. So to be living and reading this code today is perfect. God is the possibility of possibilities. God is the real. Reality is the possibility of possibility. Religion means religare, to reconnect with reality. World religion is a new emergent reality, an expression of the possibility of possibility. New life conditions generate new emergence. New need generates new emergence. World religion, as a context for our diversity, is a new divine emergent, a new quality of the real, an urgent joy, necessity, and response to the new life conditions of global catastrophic and existential risk. Okay, I will read that again because it's a lot. God is the possibility of possibility. God is the real. Reality is the possibility of possibility. Religion means religare, to reconnect with reality. World religion is a new emergent reality, an expression of the possibility of possibility. New life conditions generate new emergence. New need generates new emergence. World religion, as a context for our diversity, is a new divine emergent, a new quality of the real, an urgent joy, necessity, and response to the new life conditions of global catastrophic and existential risk. With that, I give my word back to you, David.
Thank you, Shahati. Thank you for your depth. You've been with the community so long, right? And we all have our experiences in this community. So next, we want to continue to invite you into the intimacy of this experience by inviting two of the participants of the symposium, two members of this community, Suzette, Messa, and Topher. Topher has been, of course, with his father, Terry Nelson, sort of invited into this community for several years, and he's going to share about his experience in that kind of postmodern context. And Suzette's going to also share her experience being here in this community and kind of how it's impacted her experience this weekend. So, Suzette, I turn my word to you.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here with you. Actually, I had this whole beautiful speech written, and as with anything, this thought that I was going to put out there yesterday has changed a lot, because as the day has changed, yesterday was all about kind of feeling like, wow, this is real, like it's big, it's happening. And today's experience was really unique in the place that we started out talking about how do we handle this? How do we react to this? And there was like some camps are doomer camps, and some camps are just, we'll solve it with technology. And coming from technology, that's the world I lived in. There is some beauty in being able to have that spirit that we can do this. And when you're surrounded by people that love you, and that's what I feel here, you can just like, it's palpable. You can just feel that everybody's in it for the right reasons. And so we ended this place, and that's where I'm going to kind of take where I'm going, which was we brought in Barbara Marx Hubbard, our goddess, and she had it nailed many years ago, which is crisis is a birth. And as a mother, and all you mothers out there and fathers that stood by their mothers and their wives, it's hard. Like you go into this and you're like, yeah, I want to have a baby. Yeah. And then you realize that your body's taken over. And it's a beautiful thing. But then those last weeks, you realize this is dangerous. Like this may not go right. This may not go right. But it's the right purpose, and you stay in and you do it and you create something beautiful. And so that's what we're doing, freaking creating something so beautiful. So yes, crisis of the birth, we're in it, we're going to get through this, and we're in that third category. There's huge hope. Just like when that baby's born, nothing matters. We can do this. So thank you for letting me share. And I turn it over to my friend Christopher.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't have anything specific to say, really. I just wanted to drop in on postmodernism, kind of where we are. I don't have any of the deep history in the lineage texts or the religions. I'm 26, so most of my life, most of the generations below me have spent more time with screens and technology than they do with people. That's certainly true in my own life. So I think kind of at the front end of the postmodern era. And it really is a hopeless existence. And, I can't even explain this fully to my parents because they lived in the modern era, which, borrowed some values from pre-modernity. They still could claim some axioms of value in their life. But for me, growing up, it's very hard to locate value. And therefore, why you would do anything, why you were obligated to your fellow man, to your neighbor, to your friend. So I've been living for 10, 20 years, a fairly self-centered existence. It's very small, and it doesn't consider a larger whole, but and it wasn't until I met Marc and this group that I was able to have value in my life and realize that things that you do matter, and you are obligated to your community, to humanity. And I think we're called to do this work, which is to reestablish value of the world. And for my generation, that means bringing hope back. I mean, it's no surprise that depression rates are skyrocketing, especially in young people. And it's not solved by drugs. It's not solved, purely alone by exercise. It's solved at the level of superstructure and story. And, this postmodern story I grew up in is just terrible. It's just tearing people apart. So yeah, I'll stop there and hand it back to David.
Thank you, Topher. Thank you, Suzette. So you're coming into the inside. Topher mentioned that his generation and many of us, quite frankly, spend more time on their phones than they do with other people. Right. And so what we'd like to go into now is a conversation, right? So join the conversation, participate with us in really just connecting with each other as Kristina and I kind of make sense of our experience right now. And I'm just reminded that Marc often talks about Messiah. Messiah means conversation, right? And so we're looking for actual conversation, a new conversation in the cosmos. And so let's have a little conversation. And maybe what we can do to start is, Kristina, I'd like to ask you, before I bring the question up, actually, Kristina picked me up in Cleveland. I'm from Cleveland. She's from Madison, and she drove 10 hours or something to find me in Cleveland. And when I got in the car, I had a moment where I had an embodied, felt sense realization that we were in the field together, and that I was a unique perspective of that field, looking into the eyes of a unique perspective of that field. And it was just boom, like that. It was a unique self-encounter realization. And so that's just as my own kind of experiential testimonial to the Dharma, and actually not only attracting people who have that deeper intuition and yearning for the world that we're creating, but also have language to see it when it happens and to realize it when it happens. So it's my honor to be here with my beloved Kristina and in conversation. So Kristina, what stood out so far to you in this symposium, which has been going on since yesterday?
And hello, everyone. And yeah, the whole experience with David has been in this shared language, and it's quite stunning the way that God joins us in the experiences and the conversations that we're having. So I'm so honored to have this language, this Dharma, CosmoErotic Humanism, to live in, through, and of. So one of the things that's standing out to me in this symposium, besides the beauty of the environment and the people that both David and Suzette have talked about, is like really more deeply understanding what we mean by value, and what we mean about putting value, the field of value, at the heart of cosmoerotic humanism and our lives. And so a few quotes from the paper that we're reading together is, I'm going to read them right now. So the meta crisis is in some senses the result of human action and work being done on a planetary scale, but without a world religion to bind this emergent form of human agency to the field of value. We need to step back into the field of value. Only value arouses will. This is a vital next move toward navigating the meta crisis and evolving consciousness towards a mature global civilization. And it's true that if you don't believe in the Bible or the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran, then people often think we live in a meaningless universe, right? And so let's feel into this, like how this works. So just take a moment, close your eyes. And in your body, find in your body what I see in a lot of people around me who deeply care about the earth and understand the meta crisis, but are swimming in the post-modern story of meaninglessness, no free will, and removed from the primacy of consciousness. All of this sets our conceptual switches, as Zach Stein mentioned today, that phrase, conceptual switches. They think, many of us think, ponder, imagine that our world would be better off without us. We're feeling into that quality, that the world would be better off without us. You can see, feel the pain of that, the horror of that, but also the logic of that, especially in a world without meaninglessness, or without meaning. Sorry. And so now, wash that off yourself. Now, again, close your eyes. And now, feel in your body, knowing the field of value. What is that? Knowing the primacy of consciousness, knowing that we are wanted, needed, desired from the very beginning of the Big Bang, that for 13.7 billion years, however time works, right? But that this leading edge of consciousness, this leading edge of loving, of learning to love, of wisdom, from the very beginning of everything, that the cosmos came into existence so that we could be here today, and that there's so much more to come. Feel that in your body. Let's all feel that together. It's essentially the heart of CosmoErotic Humanism, that as I spoke of in my Dharma recap, that our evolving consciousness, we grow God, we grow love and truth and beauty, and that all of that, this growing, this sense of transformation, these capacities to love and have wisdom, they all come from the beginning of time. And here we are, 13.7 billion years later, pushing on that edge. Like Suzette talked about, we're actually in this very tight space on the edge of time, on the edges of our stories, and we are needing to birth into a new place in humanity with each other. And so another quote from the paper, and then I'll ask David to reflect on this. And this is directly from the paper, and again from CosmoErotic Humanism, from this angel we are birthing, David J. Temple. As we see it, each tradition seeks in its own way to reconnect humanity to the universal field of evolving value. There is not one royal road, but there's a common destination. And so, David, what are some of your thoughts and feelings about this?
Well, the last thing that you said, well, first of all, just like, I love just going into the embodied realization of this reality, right? It doesn't have to live in mere words. The words point to something real, right? So thank you for bringing us into that. And there's something I'm sort of, one of the things that came out of this weekend so far, and that the last thing that you said really helps to remind me of, is that all of the religions, we talk about why is it that the religions themselves can't fully train us to be the new human, homo amor. Because it seems like, wait a minute, what if just the religions just did a better job of it, right? Or maybe what if the religions kind of evolved so that Christianity was about the cosmic Christ, right? Or Buddhism was about kind of, expanding the Zendo to the whole world, a world Zendo, right? That'd be awesome, right? And I would say, yeah, that would be awesome, right? To have each of these religions kind of evolve to their highest capacity and their widest embrace. But even then, you'd still have the Christians talking about Christ and the Buddhists talking about, emptiness or whatever, forms they want to use. And so they wouldn't necessarily make room for the other lineages or for people not in a lineage, right? And so that's where more and more I'm realizing, oh yeah, we actually do need something toward which all religions or worldviews are evolving, right? It's like we do need a North Star. We do need, even to say something like, oh, Buddhism believing that it's an evolving Buddhism, or Christianity believing that's an evolving Christianity, that in and of itself, oh, there's a first principle and first value, evolution. So yeah, that's one of the North Stars that make up this worldview that is the context for our diversity, right? Is evolution. And so really the importance that there's actually something new being born here. As Suzette was saying, a crisis is a birth. There is something that is emerging that's never been here before, and we really do need it. And and also that we can look to the past to help recover some of the ideas of what it might look like, but it's also so emergent that we're just have to be here, sort of in the depth of the possibility of possibility, allowing it to emerge. So that's one thing I've been kind of thinking about. And also just how much love there is in the space here. It's just so fascinating. It's from the moment that we arrived, we were taken care of by those that were residents here. We even have our own little bowls and plates and cups that are labeled with our name, right? And we were escorted to our rooms, and just like there's always someone jumping in to take care of someone else, right? And there's the primacy of loving each other that is at the center of this, really, which has been so fascinating, so inspiring. Yeah.
Beautiful. So, speaking of like why we can't just evolve the religions, one of the things that came up in the paper is that many religions are aware of existential risk. Only for them, it is part of the prophecies. So the apocalypse, for instance, must be hastened by the chosen people, right? So there's this vision of the future that is about an apocalypse, and so many people on the planet sort of working and fighting towards that prophecy. And so what is, in the context of CosmoErotic humanism and living in the field of value, this vision that we want to hold out, this clarifying image of the future that actualizes intrinsic value as an act of holy imagination and rebinds us to a reality and fosters the evolution of collective intelligence that has the moral bearing and imagination necessary to chart the path through the meta crisis. And so going back to feeling that embodiment of what does it really feel like in our bodies to know that we are the leading edge of consciousness, and that consciousness is primary, and that from the beginning of everything we are wanted, we are part of that fabric, and we are moving towards an ever more beautiful future. And yes, we're in this very pregnant stage of giving birth, and it feels quite dangerous and is. What is that? What does the birth look like? And so if we just even together feel it in our bodies together, let that spread all over the globe. Feel that possibility of possibilities, the emergence of ever more love, ever more hope, filling the spaces in between us with hope, and knowing about the morphogenic field that Rupert Sheldrake talks about, that as we embody, as we envision, as we see the future that also impregnates the consciousness of all beings. That is the vision of the future that we all hold, and we all hold that together, even as all this darkness interpenetrates our consciousness, right? So taking everything in this evolutionary context, David, this realization that consciousness is evolving and that every generation is responsible for giving its own unique gift to the evolution of consciousness. What's a thought or two that you
Yeah.
have about that?
Well, the quote you mentioned about every religion or many religions at least, have some sense of existential risk, and but it's coming from a smaller context, right? Where everything will collapse, and we are the saved ones. We are the chosen people. We are, whatever the story might be, but somehow we come out on top, right? And so if I'm part of a community, a religion that believes that, then collapse is no big deal, because it means that I'm going to be reborn in some higher state, right? But here's the thing I think that evolutionary spirituality brings so powerfully to this is that, and Suzette, we were talking about this yesterday, about we don't have to throw away the old religions that don't seem to fit anymore. We actually can evolve them, right? We can upgrade and update them. So for example, that many religions had some sense of existential risk was actually, and the apocalypse, it's actually intuition that our crisis is a birth, right? It's an intuition that we actually have to die. And now, nearly every religion says something like, we need to die to our separate self, or to the exclusive identification with our separate self, right? We have to die. Humanity has to experience the death of our experience that we're only separate, right? And an entire society based on that belief and that value, that small story. So, we can upgrade that kind of an evolutionary sense and realize, oh yes, there was always an intuition that our crisis is a birth. And I think that, we all have our own reactions to religion. I know that I've gone through my own process around when I hear world religion, part of me gets a little like, ooh, world religion, like, wait a minute, I don't want, the Catholic Church is already trying to do that. We don't need another one like that, right? And the more I'm steeped in it, the more I read closely and feel into it. And actually in the paper we read yesterday, Marc and Zach clearly explicate that it's not a homogeneous dominating religion that we're talking about, right? We're talking about a world religion as a context for our diversity, right? As a North Star toward which all religions and all peoples can align and recognize that there's value. And so, I'm going to out myself for a second. I'm coming out of the closet here as a dual citizen of the Catholic Church. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I'm also a citizen of world spirituality. That's another thing that we talked about here, is that we can actually hold that paradox, if you will, that, I am actually devoted to the Catholic Church in its depth, right? And its beauty. I've gone outside and tried the Zen thing and tried the Hindu thing and the Taoist thing. And I've learned so much from all of those, but I've always come back to my root kind of spiritual anatomy, which is the upbringing that I've had in the Catholic Church, right? And the Jesuits in particular, who have trained me in a mystical realization that God is in all things. Like, how do I throw away all that, right? And so I practice every day in this lineage, and because it speaks to me in my own unique way. And all of us have our way into that, right? And so simultaneously, I do my world spirituality chants every morning too, which keep me connected to this evolutionary impulse and ensures that I don't get stuck in the dogmatic claims that, the Catholic Church has the highest of revealed truth, however it's described, but that it's actually participating, as every religion does, in the symphony of spirit, right? In the symphony of the ultimate, in the symphony of, and I love how Dustin DePerna describes it. we are all part of the same tradition. It's the human tradition, right? And so each of the religions are like unique facets of this unity that we're participating in the evolution of love. So that's fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that, Kristina, the way that you are always imagining the possibility of possibility and what the new human, might look like. And just like, what is our community? What's next? You always are asking that question. It's almost like it is like you're embodying the question of evolution, of what is needed here, what is wanted here. So is that anything that come up around that, or maybe what are you sort of curious about, or what are you left wanting more in terms of the symposium or anything around that?
I'm kind of speechless. I'm also looking out at the snow falling, and that would be a good example, I guess, is like being in touch with the deepest natures of reality. And so when I see the snow falling, I don't just see the snow falling, but I feel my whole body in the field of snow falling. And I imagine all the unique snowflakes. I feel the fractals. And also it makes me cold, right? And also I want to go out and play in it and throw snowballs at somebody. And so just like having the capacity to imagine and hold the fullness of reality. And also I feel the world in its suffering. I feel people dying. I feel war. I feel tragedy. I feel the edge of time. And yet I'm still feeling the snow and the beauty. So sort of wrapping that all up, and then wondering this whole primariness of consciousness, how we can each take complete responsibility for the primacy of our consciousness, and not underestimate what it means to hold that vision within ourselves, even as we are inundated with the darkness and the threats and the meta crisis, but taking full responsibility for that flame of the future, for that hope. And Marc talked a lot today about radical hope and being completely hopeful, and that's not a pre-tragic state of ignoring or just not wanting to face, or not having grieved, or not being willing to grieve each and every day about what's going on in the world, but really having that flame of the future alive in us. And so I challenge each of us to keep working every day on that vision of the future that you hold within your own consciousness, and that that consciousness that of which you hold that vision of the future is part of the consciousness of the whole, of all the way back to the beginning of time and all the way into infinity. And so with that, David, anything else?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I wanted to just you brought up the hope idea, right? And just to bring you more into the intimacy of this and the love that Marc and Zach and Soryu have for each other, and the way that synergy works. There was a moment where Soryu invited us to really sit in the despair of these existential threats and just to kind of let it wash over us, right? And then there's another moment where Marc was saying we are radically filled with hope. And so there's a paradox here, right? How can those both be true? And this is an example of the spirit of evolution, which holds all paradoxes, right? And Marc often says, heaven isn't paradise, heaven is paradox, right? To be able to hold the paradox, and it's like a koan, we're in the Buddhist monastery, so we can use Buddhist terms, like a koan, we sit with it, we experience it, and then something emerges, right? And one of the things that came out for me in that paradox was that the truest hope comes after we've experienced all the darkness in a certain way, right? And I remember back in 2019 at the mystery school, Kristina, we were in our evolutionary family, and I remember it was the first time that I don't know, maybe it was the first time, but I saw someone who so clearly embodied this sense of laughing out of one side of the mouth while we cry out of the other side of our mouths, right? Like in the moment, like you were crying and then you were laughing and you were crying and laughing as you were just processing all that we were working through that week. And so there is something, this is what we're talking, this is what, evolution is inviting us all toward, is to hold as many paradoxes as we can to be able to feel the depth of the field of value underneath. And in a certain way, if any of us are still like, what do we mean by the field of value? This is a great practice, is find anything that you feel like you oppose, right? And actually try your best to embrace that opposite, or at least the values of the opposite, and watch yourself struggle to hold the paradox and then see what happens. Maybe you'll experience the field in that, because the truth that we're articulating is that it is all one field. And so there's a field of value. We can't take any particular value and divorce it from the field. That's how we get pathology. That's how we get evil. That's how we get the meta crisis. And so here we are, yearning for, reaching for the field. And I
That's
think,
beautiful. And in that field, I want you all to know that Marc is texting me love right now to send out
like
all of us literally heart. So we hold Dr. Marc Gafni in the deepest regard and thank him for all this amazing Dharma that we are speaking. And the quotes that have come from the paper that David J. Temple has written with Dr. Marc Gafni and Dr. Zachary Stein.